A biting wind swept through the towering buildings of downtown Chicago, carrying with it the sweet scent of roasted chestnuts mingling with the distant echoes of Christmas carols. The night sky was a somber gray, illuminated only by the festive glow of twinkling lights strung along every street and storefront. Amid this glittering holiday backdrop, a 10-year-old boy named Billy crouched against the cold brick of an abandoned pharmacy, his thin coat offering little protection from the punishing chill. His breath formed tiny clouds each time he exhaled, and his brown eyes, sharp beyond his years, surveyed the busy crowds rushing home with packages and laughter. Despite the holiday cheer exploding around him, brightly wrapped gifts in every shopper's arms, merry tunes spilling from open doors, Billy's world felt stark and desolate. He pulled his threadbare beanie tighter over his messy hair, praying for a scrap of warmth. Christmas Eve was supposed to be magical, a time of joy and abundance, yet here he was, huddled on the icy sidewalk with nowhere to go. His stomach cramped from hunger, reminding him that he had eaten barely anything that day. In his hand was a small crust of hardened bread, his last attempt to ward off the deep gnaw of starvation. He cringed when the wind whipped violently through the narrow alley, the snow swirling around like tiny shards of glass. He clutched that crust as if it were a priceless treasure, pressing himself deeper into the shadowed doorway. Families and couples hurried by, their faces flushed from the cold, hands holding steaming cups of cocoa or paper bags stuffed with last-minute presents. Nobody paused to notice the boy with hollow cheeks peeking out from behind a battered cardboard box. Billy was, at this moment, invisible, a child without a home, without a family, without hope. The city glittered for everyone but him. He was on the brink of breaking off a small chunk of bread to ease his hunger when a faint whimper drifted from the darkness. Hesitating, Billy peered around, searching for the source. As the wind settled, he heard it again. A soft cry, fragile and pleading. His heart tightened. Edging away from the doorway, he ventured toward the sound. That was when he saw a small brown puppy, shivering behind a trash bin. Its ribs jutted under thin, scruffy fur, and its ears lay flat against its head. The puppy's eyes, pools of quiet desperation, locked onto Billy's meager crust of bread. Instinct told him to protect the only food he had, but those eyes mirrored a loneliness he knew too well. Approaching cautiously, Billy crouched low, hands trembling from the cold. He extended a piece of the bread, his voice hoarse. "Here," he whispered. "It's not much, but you can have some." The puppy sniffed the crust, tail tucked, then gulped down the morsel in a single snap. Billy felt a pang of regret for giving away precious food, but seeing the puppy's frantic relief cut through that doubt. This tiny creature was just as hungry and alone as he was. With a slow wag of its tail, the puppy edged closer, pressing its chilled nose against Billy's frayed coat. He offered another bite, one that should have been his dinner. As the puppy devoured it, warmth flickered in Billy's chest. He forgot for a moment the pain in his own empty belly. The dog seemed so grateful, letting out a timid whine, its eyes gleaming under the flickering Christmas lights overhead. Gently, Billy reached out and stroked its matted fur. "Guess we're both out here on our own tonight," he murmured. "Merry Christmas, little guy." The wind kicked up once more, slicing through Billy's meager defenses. He scooped the puppy into his arms, feeling the frail body tremble. He remembered hearing people say never to trust strays, but how could he abandon something so pitiful, so similar to his own plight? The dog nuzzled against him, seeking any crumb of warmth. Billy looked around, despair creeping up his spine. He needed to find shelter soon or risk freezing out here. He spotted a boarded-up cafe entrance with a narrow overhang that might block some of the wind. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's get you someplace safer." Carefully, he moved to that overhang, hauling a couple of damp cardboard pieces into a makeshift lean-to. It wasn't comfortable, but it cut the wind a little. He pulled the puppy beneath his threadbare jacket, its fragile heartbeat thudding against him. The city lights glowed overhead, reflections dancing on the icy pavement. If he squinted, he could pretend it was a starry night, but in truth, the sky was suffocated by the glare of skyscrapers and street lamps. Billy tugged his knees up to his chest, hugging the puppy close. At least they had each other. The dog gave a contented sigh, drifting into restless sleep. Memories rippled through Billy's mind. A faint recollection of a warm bedroom, flickering Christmas lights on a tree, and a distant echo of laughter. He could barely remember faces, just the sensation of being safe, of someone tucking him in. That was a lifetime ago. He swallowed the ache rising in his throat, forcing himself back to the present. Every time he let his guard down, fear slid in. The puppy stirred, letting out a tiny yelp, perhaps from a dream. Billy petted its scrawny back, whispering, "It's okay. You're not alone anymore." Maybe he was speaking to himself as much as to the dog. Snow continued drifting, piling in soft mounds around them. The smell of cinnamon and roasted nuts lingered on the wind, reminding him that somewhere people were feasting. Exhaustion weighed on him, eyes stinging from the freezing temperature. He gave the puppy one final stroke before letting himself slip into a shaky doze. Hours later, he wasn't sure how many, Billy woke, startled by a faint scraping sound. A passerby in a thick wool coat was staring down at them, sympathy etched on her face. She lowered a plastic bag containing a half-eaten sandwich. Wordlessly, she placed it beside Billy and walked away. He called out a grateful, "Thank you," but she was already gone. His fingers numb, Billy tore off part of the sandwich for the puppy. He devoured the rest himself, quiet tears trickling down his cheeks at the taste of real bread, cheese, and mustard. Such a simple thing seemed heavenly. The puppy wagged its tail in a grateful frenzy, gobbling every crumb. Billy managed to smile through his tears. Maybe there was still kindness in this city. Maybe not everyone walked by with blind eyes. He licked the last of the mustard from his fingers, feeling a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in months. As dawn tiptoed in, Billy rose to his feet, cradling the puppy. He needed to keep moving. Staying in one place too long wasn't safe. Someone could chase him off, or worse. He'd heard horror stories of cruel strangers targeting the homeless for fun. Shivering, he decided to check the local soup kitchen. They might have leftover breakfast, though it was Christmas Day, and many places were short-staffed or closed. Still, it was worth a try. The puppy nestled against his coat, half asleep, trusting him completely. A pang of responsibility swelled in Billy's chest. They were partners now, for better or worse. The sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky in pale pink and gray. Christmas decorations adorned every store window, inflated Santas bobbing on rooftops. Billy trudged along the sidewalk, boots soaked through. He'd found them in a donation bin months ago, but they were full of holes. At least they protected his feet from the worst of the slush. The puppy let out a soft whine, eyes darting at passing cars. "Don't worry," Billy murmured. "I'll figure something out." He recalled vague directions to a church that sometimes opened its basement for homeless people. He hoped this was still true. On the street corner, he paused, scanning for any sign of open doors. The church up ahead looked deserted, lights off, wreaths on the doors, but no hint of life inside. Billy felt his stomach twist. He forced himself to check anyway, pushing at the heavy double doors. Locked. His heart sank. The puppy squirmed in his arms as if sensing the disappointment. "It's okay," he whispered, trying to stay calm. "We'll try the next place." The city canyons echoed with the hush of an early holiday morning. Most folks still asleep or at home, not prowling the frozen streets like him. He journeyed further, each step a battle against biting winds and creeping fatigue. Finally, he spotted a modest brick building with a makeshift sign, "Free Christmas Meal, 9 a.m." Relief washed over him like a warm bath. He approached, noticing a small group of ragged individuals waiting outside. A volunteer wearing a Santa hat moved along the line, handing out cups of coffee. Billy exhaled a shaky breath, joining the queue. The puppy, half hidden under his coat, poked its nose out, sniffing the coffee aroma. "Hey, buddy," Billy whispered. "We're gonna be okay. Hang on." When it was their turn, the volunteer offered a styrofoam cup. "Merry Christmas, little man," she said softly. "You hungry?" Billy nodded, words tangled in his throat. She gestured for him to go inside, adding, "We don't usually allow pets inside, but it's freezing out. You can come in if your pup behaves." Tears pricked at Billy's eyes. "Thank you," he managed. Stepping into the building, he felt a rush of warm air against his frozen cheeks. A wave of gratitude surged through him. For the first time in ages, he felt the sting of hope. Inside was a basic community hall with folding chairs and long tables. The walls were adorned with secondhand tinsel, and a small plastic tree stood in the corner. Volunteers busily ladled out soup and dished scrambled eggs onto paper plates. A line of hungry faces shuffled forward, nobody complaining despite the slow pace. Billy stood among them, adjusting the puppy in his arms. The dog gave a tentative wag at the savory scents filling the air. Soon enough, Billy received a portion of eggs, a slice of ham, and a side of toast. The volunteer even handed him a small dish for the puppy. Settling at the end of a table, Billy carefully placed the dish on the ground. The puppy leaped at it, gobbling each bite. Billy ate slowly, savoring the real food, warm, salty, and oh so comforting. His muscles quivered with relief, his belly welcoming the nourishment. Overhearing volunteers chat, he learned the hall would close after lunch. That meant he had a few hours of respite, maybe a chance to rest. He glanced around at the other homeless souls, an older woman clutching a stuffed penguin toy, a man with a scratchy beard humming carols to himself. Each, in their own way, carried stories of loss. A kind-faced volunteer approached, kneeling beside Billy's chair. "Hi there, I'm Mr. Watson," he said softly. "Are you alone, kiddo?" Billy nodded, voice stuck. He patted the puppy's head, who was busy licking scraps off the plate. Mr. Watson's eyes flicked to the dog, concern obvious. "Must be tough out there," he murmured. "Listen, if you need a place tonight, there's a winter shelter across the river that might have space. They sometimes allow animals. I can give you directions." Billy blinked, heart pounding. Shelter. He'd tried a few, but they often turned away pets. "Thank you," he whispered. "Could you show me on a map?" Mr. Watson pulled out a small tourist brochure, flipping to the city map. He circled a spot, explaining which buses to take or how to walk there. He warned Billy that space was limited, so he should arrive early. Billy took in every word, hope blossoming. "You've been real nice," he said, voice quivering. I don't have a family, but I got this puppy now. I can't just leave him behind." The volunteer's gentle smile reassured him. "Of course not. Looks like he's your best friend. Good luck, son." He slipped a small bag of dog treats into Billy's hands. "Merry Christmas." That afternoon, Billy dozed in a corner, letting the puppy curl up on his lap. The hall bustled with activity. Volunteers washing dishes, people chatting softly. Outside, the wind still howled, but Billy felt shielded here. He fought the urge to dwell on the heartbreak that led him to the streets. Instead, he stroked the puppy's fur, thanking whatever kindness guided them to this meal. Eventually, the volunteers started tidying up. Billy stood, grateful for their mercy. He thanked each person he could, then stepped back out into the cold, determined to find this rumored shelter. Following Mr. Watson's directions, Billy wound through several blocks. The puppy trotted at his side, occasionally slipping on icy patches. At times, Billy scooped him up to prevent injury. The city lights brightened as dusk fell once more, turning store windows into glowing vignettes of holiday abundance. Mannequins wearing Santa hats, plastic reindeer, neon candy canes. It was enchanting for those who could afford it, but for Billy it served as a harsh reminder of what he lacked. Still, he soldiered on, the address etched firmly in his mind. If this shelter had space, maybe he and his pup could avoid another brutal night in the open. Crossing the river on a steel bridge, Billy clutched the puppy tighter as the wind lashed at them. The murky water below mirrored the city's neon glow. He recalled times he'd huddled under a different bridge, wind slicing through him, nights he had almost lost all faith in the world. But the puppy shivered against his chest, offering silent companionship. Billy refused to let despair claim him now. He was so close to a possible refuge. One foot after the other, he pressed on, heart pounding with anticipation. He finally spotted a modest brick building with a handwritten sign, "Overnight Winter Shelter, check-in 6 p.m. Weak yellow light shone through the windows. Outside, a few figures clustered, shoulders hunched. Billy quietly joined them, puppy in his arms. He overheard them worrying about bed availability, muttering about how it was first come, first served. Anxiety twisted in Billy's gut. If they ran out of cots, he'd be out of luck. He gently petted the dog, praying they'd be accepted. One by one, they filed in. Billy stepped forward with bated breath, praying the puppy wouldn't disqualify him. A volunteer, her kind face etched with fatigue, greeted him. "Hi, kid. Name?" Billy hesitated. Billy." She glanced at the pup. "We don't normally allow dogs unless they're service animals," she began. Billy's heart sank. "But it's Christmas," the volunteer's colleague said, appearing at her side. "We can't leave them out there in the cold." After a moment of silent debate, they nodded. "All right, come on in. Keep your pup on your lap and try to keep him calm, okay?" Billy nearly burst into tears with relief. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So much." They walked in, stepping into a large communal space. Rows of folding cots lined the walls, each with a thin blanket. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm. A coffee machine stood in one corner, and a table offered simple snacks, mostly crackers, some fruit. People of all ages mumbled greetings or kept to themselves. The volunteer led Billy to an empty cot near the wall. "You can stay tonight," she said gently. "We'll see how tomorrow goes." Billy's chest tightened with gratitude. The puppy gave a tiny lick to his cheek, as if to echo that thank you. At last, they wouldn't freeze outside. Sinking onto the cot, Billy exhaled shakily. He set the puppy at his feet, rummaging in the bag for the dog treats Mr. Watson had given them. The pup devoured one, tail thumping. Billy allowed himself a moment to soak in the safety. No wind, no biting cold. A volunteer brought a small bowl of water for the dog. Another offered Billy a cup of lukewarm soup. His first sip felt like heaven. Slowly, the tension in his muscles eased. People here were strangers, but none looked at him with malice. They were all survivors in some way, drawn together by hardship. Night fell outside, but the shelter kept a few lights on. Billy noticed a battered TV in the corner playing a fuzzy holiday special. The puppy dozed off, snuggled on his cot. Billy tried to rest, but memories of the street churned in his mind. He thought of the times he'd rummaged through garbage for scraps, how many nights he'd nearly lost hope. Now a soft hum of people chatting replaced the threat of darkness. He felt tears slip down his face, tears of relief and sadness all jumbled together. Quietly he wiped them away, not wanting anyone to see him cry. In a corner, a man strummed a guitar, murmuring a gentle carol. Across the room, a weary mother rocked a toddler. The father rummaged through a tattered backpack. Billy watched them, heart aching. Everyone here had stories, reasons they ended up in this place instead of a cozy living room. He gently petted the sleeping puppy's ears, whispering, "We're safe now." For once, he believed it. Christmas decorations on the wall, a small paper wreath, a crooked star, reminded him this was the holiday season. Yet it wasn't the glitzy version on TV. It was real, raw, made of shared vulnerability and scraps of hope. As the clock neared midnight, volunteers passed out extra blankets. Billy wrapped one around himself and the puppy, grateful for every thread of warmth. He lay down. The puppy nestled at his stomach and listened to the soft murmurs drifting through the room. Over in the corner, the guitar man began softly singing Silent Night, his voice rich with unspoken emotion. Billy's eyelids grew heavy. He let the lull of that quiet song guide him into slumber, heart full from the day's unexpected acts of kindness. For the first time in so long, he dared to dream of a tomorrow brighter than his yesterday. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Volunteers tidied the cots, handed out minimal breakfast, mostly toast and oatmeal. The puppy gobbled a bit of plain oatmeal Billy set aside. They had to clear out by 9 a.m., making room for daily operations. Billy rubbed the sleep from his eyes, the puppy bounding at his feet. A volunteer approached, smiling. "How did you sleep?" Billy managed a shy grin. "Good, thank you." She offered him a slip of paper. "This is an address for a day center. You can hang out there until evening. We do check in again at 6 if you want another night." Billy's heart soared. "Another night off the streets?" "Yes, please," he said quickly. They only nodded. Gathering his meager belongings, he stepped out into daylight, the puppy following. The cold stung, but it didn't feel as hopeless, because he had a plan. Go to the day center, Then come back here at 6. He gently lifted the dog. We'll figure this out, he said, voice brimming with cautious optimism. Snow crunched underfoot. The city glistened under the winter sun, icicles hanging from awnings like crystal daggers. Despite everything, Billy felt something shift inside him, like the puppy had reignited a spark that had nearly died. He made his way to the day center, weaving through crowds that had re-emerged post-Christmas. Some stores were open for returns or after-holiday sales. Bags rustled, cash registers chimed. Billy tried not to stare too long at window displays he couldn't afford. The puppy whimpered occasionally, but the dog treats helped calm it. They arrived at an older building with a sign reading, Haven Drop-In. Volunteers inside welcomed him, offering a seat and a place to rest for the day. Billy breathed a sigh of relief. Even if it wasn't glamorous, it was a space without fear of being thrown out. The puppy settled at his feet, tail wagging. Throughout the day, Billy dozed, read a few donated comic books, and chatted with other homeless youths who drifted through. Some were older teens with hardened gazes, worn down by a system that failed them. Others were younger kids with haunted eyes. Billy's puppy drew attention, gentle smiles from those who missed having a pet. A staff member approached him softly. We might have a long-term shelter that allows pets if you're interested. Billy nodded, hope flaring. She took his name and some details, promising to reach out if a spot opened. He tried to not get too excited, having faced disappointments before, but it was something. As evening neared, Billy thanked the center staff and hurried back to the winter shelter. More people lined up this time. Word had spread about a heated space. Billy prayed they wouldn't turn him away. The puppy shivered in his arms, gaze flicking anxiously at the crowd. After a tense wait, he made it through the door. The volunteer from before recognized him, gave a small nod, and allowed him entry. Relief surged like a warm tide. He found the same cot, carefully placed the puppy down. Tonight they had a small pot of soup, and Billy felt tears of gratitude as he sipped each spoonful. Days bled into each other. Billy returned to the day center by morning, then back to the shelter in the evening, forging a routine. He learned the names of some volunteers, discovered who to trust among other homeless individuals. The puppy, which he decided to call Buddy, became a little ball of energy whenever they were indoors, wagging at everyone. Buddy's health improved. His coat looked a bit shinier, and he gained weight from the daily feed. The volunteers seemed charmed by this boy-dog duo, occasionally offering dog biscuits or an extra blanket for them both. Billy's spirit mended slowly. One afternoon, Mrs. Johnson, a social worker with a warm grin, entered the day center. She spotted Billy and Buddy, approached with a gentle wave. Hey there, I heard you've been sleeping at the winter shelter. Billy nodded. She crouched, letting Buddy sniff her hand. I know of a longer-term shelter across town. It's small, but it might have room for you and your dog. Would you be interested in giving it a try? Billy's heart hammered. Yes, but will they really let Buddy stay? Ms. Johnson smiled softly. I believe so. This place has a no one left behind philosophy. Let me call and see. They sat at a corner table while Ms. Johnson phoned the shelter's director. Billy petted Buddy to keep calm, a bubble of excitement warring with nervousness. After a brief conversation, Ms. Johnson hung up, her smile widening. They have a bed. We can go tonight if you're ready. Billy blinked in amazement. Really? I'm ready. Ms. Johnson explained the location was about an hour's bus ride away. The facility offered basic dorm-style housing, counseling, and assistance with finding permanent solutions. Billy nearly cried from relief. Buddy gave a small bark as if celebrating. Ms. Johnson laughed. That's a yes from him too, I guess. That evening, Ms. Johnson picked them up from the day center. They boarded a city bus. Buddy nestled protectively on Billy's lap. The ride felt surreal. Watching flickers of the city lights pass by, Billy realized how far he'd come in just a few days. From freezing on Christmas Eve to receiving daily meals, from hopeless loneliness to guided support. Buddy occasionally poked his head out the window, ears flapping. Billy giggled at the dog's curiosity. Ms. Johnson watched them with a smile, remarking how incredible it was that Billy still had hope after everything he'd endured. He shrugged, cheeks flushing. Having Buddy with me helped. he said quietly. When they arrived, a modest sign outside the shelter read, New Dawn Housing, everyone deserves a fresh start. The building was older but well-maintained, illuminated by a single warm porch light. Ms. Johnson led them in, where a middle-aged man introduced himself as Mr. Harris, the director. He offered a handshake. Welcome, Billy. Heard you've had a rough journey. We'll do our best to help you and Buddy. Billy's throat tightened with emotion, and he managed a quiet thank you. The interior was simple, a small lobby, a lounge area with mismatched furniture, and a row of doors leading to dorm rooms. For Billy, it felt like stepping into an oasis after wandering a desert. Mr. Harris showed Billy to a shared room, containing 2 bunk beds. No one else was currently assigned, so Billy had the space to himself. We'll see about your dog, Mr. Harris said, eyeing Buddy. For now, he can stay with you. Just keep him from chewing the mattresses, all right? Billy grinned, hugging Buddy. I'll keep an eye on him. Thanks, sir. This was more privacy and stability than he'd experienced in as long as he could remember. A staff member handed Billy a small set of toiletries, fresh socks, and a blanket for Buddy's corner. Billy felt tears gather again, a strange mixture of hope, gratitude, and disbelief. That night, Billy lay on the lower bunk, Buddy curled at his feet, a thin but clean blanket over both of them. Outside the window, the city's glow formed a halo of soft light. Though the shelter was quiet, Billy's mind buzzed with possibility. Would he get to stay here long term? Could he find schooling, maybe learn something beyond survival tactics on the street? His heart pounded at the thought of stepping into a classroom again, but part of him yearned for it. Buddy kicked in his sleep, chasing dream rabbits. Billy reached to pat him. That single act on Christmas Eve, sharing stale bread, had led to this sanctuary. He felt a swelling sense that some miracles arrive in small steps. Morning brought introductions with various staff members. Some taught basic life skills, others helped with job placement or arranged therapy sessions. They all greeted Billy warmly, smiling at Buddy. Billy learned about rules. Sign in by certain times, keep the area tidy, show respect to others. He took it seriously, desperate not to lose this chance. Over breakfast in a small dining hall, he savored oatmeal and juice, glancing around at other residents. Men, women, even a few teenagers. Everyone had scars, visible or hidden, from hardships endured. A hush of understanding, almost like a silent bond, connected them all. After the meal, a volunteer named Janet offered Billy a quick orientation. She explained they could help him acquire ID papers if needed, enroll in local youth programs, and possibly reconnect him with any surviving family. Billy shrank at the mention of family. He couldn't remember any who might take him in. Janet, noticing his discomfort, reassured him gently, It's your choice. We just want to give you every option. Buddy tugged at his shoelace, begging for attention. Billy scooped him up, pressing his face into the dog's fur. My only family is right here, he whispered, fighting back a wave of hurt. Days turned to weeks. Billy adjusted to a routine that included chores, group counseling, and sessions where staff taught budgeting or job prep basics. Though only 10, he soaked up the knowledge, especially the reading lessons offered in the lounge. He discovered Buddy acted like a magnet, lifting people's spirits. During quiet times, Billy would settle on a worn couch, Buddy on his lap, as he sounded out words from donated children's books. Each page turned, each new word spoken, chipped away at the feeling that he was forever stuck in darkness. Meanwhile, staff helped him get medical checkups and better clothing. In late January, a social worker, Miss Davies, approached him about formal education. We can place you in a special program, she said, for kids who've missed traditional school. Billy's gut twisted with anxiety, but he also felt an eager flicker at the idea of learning. Ms. Davies assured him they'd accommodate Buddy somehow, and the shelter would watch the pup during class if needed. Billy agreed, trembling at the notion of stepping into a classroom after so long. But Buddy seemed to sense his nerves, offering a comforting nuzzle. That small gesture reminded Billy he wasn't alone. Outside, winter raged on, but inside New Dawn housing, Billy found a semblance of normalcy. On crisp mornings, he walked Buddy in a small courtyard out back, where staff had cleared some snow. The puppy pranced around, tail wagging, as Billy marveled at how much he'd grown. They'd bonded deeply, each giving the other reason to keep going. During the night, Billy still had nightmares about freezing on a curb or about losing Buddy in a sea of strangers. Yet he'd awakened to find the dog nestled under his arm, heartbeat steady, and realized they were safe now. Staff introduced Billy to a short tutoring class inside the shelter's rec room. Other homeless kids joined. Their situations varied, some traveling with their parents, some alone like Billy. They built camaraderie, sharing stories of street survival. Buddy became the class mascot, curled under the table, occasionally popping up to lick a hand or wag at someone crying. Billy noticed that the puppy's presence calmed anxious kids and broke the ice for those too shy to speak. A teacher praised Billy's reading progress, urging him to keep practicing. Each success stoked a fire in Billy's heart, a drive to reclaim the life stolen by circumstance. By early February, Miss Davies said a local transitional family shelter might accept Billy, complete with in-house schooling and dog-friendly rules. However, it meant relocating again. Billy hesitated, recalling the sting of being moved around. The staff at New Dawn Housing assured him they'd still be in touch, that he'd keep building on the progress he'd made. Ultimately, Billy realized it was another step forward, closer to real stability. He swallowed his fears, nodding. "As long as Buddy can come," he insisted. Ms. Davies smiled. "Absolutely, we'd never separate you two. You're a package deal, right?" Billy grinned, a shy warmth spreading. On moving day, volunteers helped pack his few belongings: a couple shirts, donated jeans, secondhand shoes, plus dog supplies. Buddy seemed excited, wagging at every box. Billy stood by the exit, tears welling as he bid goodbye to the folks at New Dawn. Mr. Harris gave him a gentle pat on the shoulder, praising his perseverance. The staff who'd grown fond of Buddy showered him with final belly rubs. Although this next place was supposedly better suited for a long haul, leaving felt like closing a precious chapter. He promised them he'd visit and let them know how he was doing. The transitional shelter, called Green Meadows, proved more structured. They assigned Billy a small dorm room with a single bed, a real desk, and a dog bed for Buddy. He nearly gasped at the normalcy. His own desk, a curtained window looking out at a modest yard. A daily schedule pinned on the bulletin board outlined mealtimes, study hours, chores. For once, Billy embraced the structure. It was a far cry from drifting aimlessly in frozen streets. Buddy adapted quickly, greeting staff with happy yips. Observing the boy-dog duo, a counselor laughed. "We see who's the real boss here," nodding at Buddy. Nighttime at Green Meadows was calmer than Billy expected. No snoring crowd in a single room, no fear of being turned away the next morning. He shared the dorm floor with a few other kids, each with their own stories of hardship. Some were runaways, some had families who visited. Billy often found himself gravitating to those still processing heavy trauma. Buddy's presence worked wonders, letting them pet or cuddle him if they felt overwhelmed. Billy realized how his own healing journey might help others. In group therapy sessions, he spoke about that Christmas Eve, how a single crumb of bread changed everything. He told them how he nearly clung to that bread for himself, how hunger gnawed his insides. Yet the puppy's helplessness forced compassion out of him. Each word spilled out shakily, raw, but the group listened with quiet respect. Some cried, others nodded in understanding. For Billy, recounting the story felt both painful and cathartic. Maybe that's how it always would be. Painful memories tempered by the knowledge that he'd survived and grown. Meanwhile, Buddy would rest his head on Billy's foot, as if anchoring him to the present while he dove into the past. Spring approached, thawing the snowdrifts into slush. Billy's daily routine flourished: morning chores, midday classes, evening free time. The staff encouraged him to explore creative outlets: art, writing, or music. He gravitated toward journaling. Each entry read like a conversation between him and Buddy, recounting little triumphs or frustrations. He also wrote about the chilling nights on the street, how he felt invisible among crowds celebrating Christmas. The more he poured onto the page, the more a new identity took shape. A kid with resilience, not just a homeless boy with nowhere to go. On a warm afternoon, Ms. Davies informed Billy that a local alternative school program had accepted him for the next academic year. They specialized in bridging educational gaps for homeless or underprivileged kids. Billy felt both excitement and dread swirl in his gut. "I'm behind," he worried. "What if I can't catch up?" Ms. Davies squeezed his shoulder gently. "We'll help you, Billy. You've shown a lot of determination. Buddy's not invited to class, but the shelter will watch him while you're in school." Relieved, Billy nodded. This was the next leap. He had spent too long drifting. Maybe it was time to stand on firmer ground. By mid-spring, Billy thrived under the shelter's routine. He found friends among kids who shared their own dark histories. They studied together, played simple games outside, sometimes even told jokes about how their old lives felt like war stories. Buddy, in the meantime, became everyone's beloved companion, trotting from person to person for ear scratches. Staff noticed Billy had a knack for comforting newcomers, guiding them through their first-night anxieties. A counselor teased him about being a future mentor. Billy only shrugged, but deep down, warmth flickered. He liked the idea of paying forward the kindness he received. Late one evening, Billy gazed at the stars from a small patio area behind the dorm. Buddy lay by his feet, eyes half closed. The memory of that wind-whipped Christmas Eve flooded back, how he'd been so certain he might not survive another night. And then, with a single act of giving, everything shifted. He gently stroked Buddy's ears, whispering, "You saved me as much as I saved you." The puppy licked his hand, tail thumping softly. Billy smiled, tears forming. He promised himself to never forget the lesson that even the smallest kindness can spark a chain reaction leading to hope. As months rolled by, Billy's reading and math skills improved. Teachers praised his eagerness, noting how the boy who once flinched at the idea of school now devoured books. He particularly loved stories of heroes facing impossible odds, transforming adversity into strength. Buddy occasionally sat near him while he did homework, muzzle on Billy's leg. Whenever frustration built, Billy would bury his face in Buddy's fur, drawing calm. Late at night, he'd write about their city adventures in a personal journal, how the sight of a single sandwich or warm soup felt like miracles, how small kindnesses from strangers rebuilt his shattered faith. Summer arrived, and the transitional shelter organized an outing to a local park. Billy carried Buddy's leash, grinning as they joined other kids for an afternoon of fresh air. Sunlight filtered through tall oaks, the grass lush and welcoming. They played tag, had a picnic of sandwiches and chips, and listened to staff share comedic stories. Buddy chased squirrels, occasionally returning to Billy's side for comfort. It was a stark contrast to the lonely corners of the city Billy once roamed. He realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was living. The day ended with laughter echoing among trees, a memory etched into Billy's heart. When the school year began, Billy rode a bus to the alternative school. He clutched his backpack, nerves jangling. The building's hallways bustled with kids who carried unique scars. Some had academic gaps, some emotional trauma. Billy fit right in a way. A teacher greeted him kindly, showing him to a seat near the window. This was a new world. Structured lessons, daily homework, teachers who wanted him to succeed. After class, he hurried back to the shelter to collect Buddy. Every day the dog barked happily at his return, as if praising him for braving another challenge. Over dinners in the common area, Billy chatted about what he learned, occasionally prompting wide-eyed questions from younger residents. A year raced by. Billy stood taller, no longer as scrawny, no longer hollow-eyed. Buddy grew healthier, bounding around the yard with endless energy. Billy had extended reading sessions, devouring novels about kids who overcame adversity. The shelter staff teased him, calling him our little scholar. Meanwhile, the memory of that Christmas Eve still guided him. If not for that moment of empathy, offering a sliver of bread, he might never have discovered a path to safety. One afternoon, Ms. Davies told him about a possible foster family who loved animals. They had a stable home environment. Did Billy want to meet them? At first, panic spiked within him. Another move? Another unknown? But Ms. Davies explained this family specialized in fostering older kids, and they were open to Buddy living there too. Billy sat in silence, Buddy's head on his lap. The shelter, though beneficial, was never meant to be permanent. He longed for a real home, somewhere with a sense of belonging. He nodded slowly. I guess we can try. Ms. Davies set up a meeting. Billy combed his hair nervously that morning, wearing donated jeans and a neat sweater. The puppy's tail wagged as if sensing Billy's anxious excitement. The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Turner, greeted Billy with genuine warmth. They knelt to greet Buddy, smiling at his enthusiastic licks. Over coffee in a quiet corner of the shelter's lounge, they asked Billy about his interests, his schooling, and how Buddy came into his life. Billy recounted the Christmas Eve story in a hushed voice, eyes occasionally misting. The Turners listened intently, exchanging understanding glances. "Our door is open," Mrs. Turner said, voice wavering with emotion. "We have a spare bedroom, a small yard. We'd love to give you both a chance for something stable." Billy's heart lurched. Could this be it? They arranged a trial weekend. Billy felt sick with nerves as Miss Davies drove him to the Turners' small, tidy house in a suburban neighborhood. The street had rows of similar houses, each with neat lawns and colorful mailboxes. Buddy peered out the car window, ears perking at the unfamiliar scene. Stepping onto the driveway, Billy felt a surreal wave wash over him. Could this be a place he'd actually live? The Turners welcomed him inside, showing him a modest bedroom with a twin bed, a soft comforter, a desk with a lamp, a window overlooking a maple tree. These details felt almost dreamlike. That weekend, Billy and Buddy explored the house. They found the kitchen stocked with basic groceries, a living room full of cozy pillows, a backyard enclosed by a wooden fence. The Turners tried not to overwhelm Billy, letting him settle at his own pace. At dinner, they served spaghetti and meatballs, Buddy happily munching on kibble under the table. Billy soaked in the normalcy of it all, the conversation about daily routines, the laughter at silly jokes. He was shy, but they didn't push. When bedtime came, Buddy curled up on a dog bed near Billy's, and the boy fell asleep to a sense of unprecedented comfort. On Sunday, the Turners drove him back to the shelter, giving him time to decide if he wanted to continue fostering. Billy was quiet, uncertain if he deserved such a living arrangement, but the staff noticed a spark in his eyes, a hesitant joy that hadn't been there before. Ms. Davies pulled him aside. "How did it go?" He fiddled with Buddy's collar, voice trembling. "It was nice, like a real home, but I'm scared." Ms. Davies nodded. "Fear is normal. Take your time. If you decide you want to stay, we'll help with the paperwork." Billy exhaled a long breath. Relief and anxiety tangled inside him. Over the next week, Billy weighed the pros and cons. The shelter had been good to him, but it was a temporary place. The Turners offered stability, maybe even a future. He confided in Buddy each night, as if the pup could offer advice. Buddy merely wagged, licking Billy's face. In that simple gesture, Billy sensed an answer. They had come this far together, so maybe they could keep moving forward. With the staff's support, Billy told Ms. Davies he was ready. Soon he packed up his meager possessions, said tearful goodbyes to the friends and counselors who had saved his life countless times, and departed for the Turners' house to begin a new chapter. Life with the Turners wasn't free of challenges. Billy had nightmares, waking in a sweat, convinced he was back on the street. Mr. Turner would knock softly, offering a warm glass of milk. The couple gently reassured him he was safe. Buddy adapted quickly, loving the fenced yard, the scheduled meal times. Billy attended his alternative school daily. Over dinners, they'd discuss how his classes went, how Buddy spent the day sunning himself in the backyard. Each small routine chipped away at Billy's fear. The house smelled of lemon cleanser and fresh laundry, a stark contrast to the stench of alleyways he once knew. Gradually, Billy allowed himself glimpses of normal teenage life. He tried video games for the first time, though his hand-eye coordination needed work. He discovered a fondness for drawing dogs in a small sketch pad Mrs. Turner gifted him. He read novels in the living room while Buddy dozed at his feet. On weekends, they sometimes went to a local park where Billy watched families picnic, children giggle on swings. Each scene resonated with him, a reminder that though his past was dark, he had a chance to write a brighter future. The Turners never pried too deep, waiting patiently for him to share. One evening, Mr. Turner told Billy they could legally foster him until he turned 18, if that's what he wanted. Billy blinked back tears, astonished that they were willing to keep him that long. "We care about you," Mr. Turner said simply, a fatherly warmth in his voice. Billy nodded, voice catching. "I'd like that," he whispered. Buddy, as if sensing the importance of the moment, placed a paw on Billy's knee. Mrs. Turner gently patted Billy's shoulder, her eyes shining with empathy. This was genuine acceptance, not a fleeting gesture of pity. Billy felt a surge of love for these people who barely knew him, yet opened their home so selflessly. When Christmas approached again, Billy felt a swirl of emotions. A year ago, he had crouched alone in the cold, offering the last of his stale bread to a half-frozen puppy. Now he was in a warm, decorated living room, with Buddy sprawled across a cushy dog bed near the fireplace. The Turners had hung stockings, one even labeled with Buddy. Billy couldn't stop staring at the tree, dazzled by the colorful ornaments. The couple noticed his wonder, smiling knowingly. They asked if he wanted to help place the star on top. With shaky hands, Billy climbed a small step stool, placing the star gently at the peak. Tears pricked his eyes at how different this Christmas was compared to the last. Christmas morning found Billy waking to the smell of cinnamon rolls baking. He padded into the living room, Buddy trailing behind. They found small gifts under the tree: socks, a new sketchbook, dog treats, a cozy sweater for Buddy. As Billy unwrapped them, memories of last year's hunger pangs flickered in his mind. Now he was full, warm, safe, almost like living someone else's dream. The Turners sipped coffee, capturing the moment with a phone camera. Billy smiled shyly, hugging Buddy. If the boy from a year ago could see him now, he'd be in disbelief. That single act of compassion had led him here. Days became weeks, months turned into a second year, and Billy cemented his place in the Turner household. He advanced in school, making up for lost time. He enrolled in extracurricular art club, found a knack for painting. Meanwhile, Buddy thrived as the beloved family dog. Sometimes Billy posted pictures on social media, recounting how he found Buddy in that Chicago alley. Friends responded with awe, touched by the simplicity of how one moment can redirect a life. Billy also visited the old shelters occasionally, dropping off donations from the Turners. He never forgot the people still struggling, the volunteers who gave him a chance. By the time Billy reached his late teens, he talked openly about his story. In small volunteer gatherings, he shared how that Christmas Eve shaped him, how empathy sparked a domino effect of new opportunities. He'd watch tears form in listeners' eyes. He reminded them that kindness isn't about grand gestures. Sometimes it's a piece of stale bread shared under a freezing sky. Buddy would sit at his feet during these talks, a living testament to the power of compassion. People often approached him after saying, "You've inspired me to help more," or "Thank you for reminding me hope still exists." Billy felt gratitude each time. As high school graduation approached, Billy felt a familiar nervousness. He'd gone from a boy who never imagined stepping inside a classroom again to a student at the cusp of finishing. The Turners beamed with pride. Buddy was older now, gray around the muzzle, slower in step, but still greeting Billy at the door each afternoon. On graduation day, Billy wore a cap and gown. The memory of that harsh December night flooded back as he crossed the stage. He shook the principal's hand, tears burning in his eyes, remembering how close he'd come to never reaching this moment. From behind the camera lens, Mr. and Mrs. Turner waved, cheering for their foster son. Outside in the parking lot, Buddy waited patiently with a bright dog bandana. The Turners had arranged special permission to let him roam in a corner of the grassy area. Billy crouched, hugging the dog tight. "We did it, Buddy," he said, voice cracking. A small gathering of teachers and friends from the shelter days joined in, congratulating him. "Your story could be a movie," someone joked. Billy just laughed softly, though part of him agreed that it all felt unreal. He never took the blessing for granted. Each breath, each moment of safety, each day of learning felt like a miracle, born from a single night in a small piece of bread. In the following years, Billy considered different paths. He could become a social worker, volunteer with animal rescues, or maybe study art. Ultimately, he decided to focus on social work, hoping to help kids who'd been where he was. With the Turner's support, he enrolled in a local community college, balancing part-time work with classes. Buddy, though older, still wagged that same unstoppable tail, proud to see Billy chase a future once deemed impossible. Some nights, Billy wrote short stories about street survival, about how one fleeting act of kindness can cascade into something life-changing. As time flowed, Buddy's health waned. Age caught up with him. Billy stayed gentle, giving him the best care possible. Eventually, the day came when Buddy slipped away peacefully at the vet's office, Billy cradling the dog's head. The heartbreak felt immeasurable. Buddy had been his anchor, his first friend in a desolate world. The Turners, tears in their eyes, supported Billy through the grief. He placed Buddy's collar in a keepsake box, whispering thanks for every moment they shared. In that quiet heartbreak, Billy resolved to continue Buddy's legacy, to help the homeless, the abandoned, the forgotten. Even after Buddy's passing, Billy's story drew attention from local media. He appeared in a short documentary about homeless youth who found hope through community support. The camera zoomed in on the battered collar, the old photographs of him hugging a scrawny puppy under neon lights. He spoke softly, recounting how that bread crust bridged two lonely souls. "He saved me," Billy often said, "more than I ever saved him." The documentary went viral locally, prompting donations to shelters and renewed compassion among viewers. Billy felt Buddy's spirit in every changed life, every dog rescued, every child believed in. And so Billy's journey continued, a cycle of giving back, of sharing the power of that Christmas Eve. He volunteered each holiday season at the very shelters that took him in, telling his story to remind everyone that no gesture is too small, no life too broken. Each time he laid out the facts, one boy, one starving puppy, one piece of bread. The chain reaction from that single act was unimaginable, leading to second chances and a family that embraced him. People listened wide-eyed, sometimes in tears, moved by how such a tiny spark can brighten the bleakest night. Years later, Billy, now a young adult, stood outside that old building where he first spent Christmas Eve with Buddy. The city had changed. Some shops closed, new ones opened, but the memory of that harsh wind and stale bread never faded. He clutched a small bouquet of flowers, placing them by the wall where he and Buddy had huddled. A hush settled, snow drifting lazily under the street lamp. Billy closed his eyes, remembering how hopeless he felt, how the dog's whimper snapped him from his own desperation. Opening his eyes, he whispered, "Thank you, Buddy," then stepped away, tears glinting under the dim lights. He strolled toward a new shelter, a bag of supplies in hand, cans of dog food, warm socks, gloves. The staff recognized him immediately, greeting him as a local hero. Billy laughed self-consciously, repeating his usual disclaimer. "I'm no hero, just someone who got help by a puppy and a lot of good people." He set the supplies down, offering a quick speech to the residents. His words floated through the stale air, weaving empathy, heartbreak, and hope into a story that felt as raw as the day it happened. They clung to every syllable, some drawn to tears. Billy ended with, "If a boy with nothing can still share what little he has, imagine what we can do together." That Christmas Eve, Billy found himself at a candlelight vigil for homeless youth organized downtown. Candles flickered in slender cups, a hush of reverence blanketing the crowd. He held his candle carefully, mindful of the flame's fragility. The ceremony honored those still on the streets, those who'd lost their lives, and those who, like Billy, found a path forward. As the organizer called his name, Billy approached the microphone, candle trembling in his hand. In a clear, soft voice, he retold his story, how he'd offered his last crumb of bread and unexpectedly ignited a chain of hope. The crowd listened, silent but rapt. Finishing, he gazed around at hundreds of faces lit by candlelight. He recalled being that boy in the alley, hungry, alone. If someone had told him then that he'd be here, encouraging a sea of people to care, he would have laughed in disbelief. Yet here he stood, living proof that no circumstance is beyond redemption if empathy intersects at the right moment. The crowd erupted in gentle applause. Tears wet Billy's cheeks. He dedicated his words to Buddy, to the volunteers, and to every stranger who dropped a sandwich or a kind word in his path. In that moment, the city's cold stone walls glimmered like the greatest cathedral of compassion he could imagine. Later that night, Billy walked alone along the Chicago River, reflecting on how one Christmas Eve shaped his entire future. The water reflected dazzling holiday lights from nearby buildings. He pictured Buddy running alongside him, tail wagging, but the reality was an empty space at his side. Still, he felt an unbreakable connection to his friend, like Buddy's love was etched into him forever. A soft flurry of snow fell, dusting his hair. He remembered how the puppy's first wag warmed his frozen heart. That was the moment that revived him, that taught him hope thrives on the smallest acts. He paused at a bridge, leaning over the railing to watch the current flow under patches of ice. Somewhere out there, he knew other kids braved the night alone, just as he once did. He prayed they'd find their own Buddy or meet a compassionate soul who'd guide them toward shelter. Maybe in time the world would lessen the need for such tragedies, but until then, he'd keep fighting for them. Keep telling his story, keep volunteering, keep reminding people that a piece of stale bread could spark a miracle. His breath misted in the frigid air, a small cloud dissolving into the dark. A few more years slid by, and Billy, now in his 20s, contributed to homeless youth advocacy groups. He joined an animal rescue initiative called Hopeful Paws, which specialized in pairing homeless adolescents with rescued dogs for mutual healing. Through that program, countless teens discovered the comfort of caring for a pet that needed them. Billy had come full circle, paying forward the lifeline Buddy once handed him. He never failed to credit that cold Christmas Eve. "Without Buddy," he'd say, "I'd have given up. But we saved each other." Over time, he penned a short memoir, dedicating it to Buddy. Local bookstores praised its heartfelt simplicity. He always revisited the alley on Christmas Eve, placing a small dog treat or flower as a token of memory. Each time, a swirl of emotions overwhelmed him: gratitude, sorrow, wonder. He replayed that night in his head: the hunger, the swirling snow, the sting of isolation. Then the puppy's timid approach, the final chunk of bread offered. That single moment bridged despair and deliverance. He never grew tired of telling people that big changes can come from small gestures. People labeled him a champion for the homeless, but he knew the real champion was a helpless puppy who taught him how to be human. Now, as he looked back over his life, Billy recognized every stumbling block that turned into a stepping stone. The volunteers in that community hall, the winter shelter staff bending the rules for Buddy, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Davies guiding him to safer options, the Turners granting him a family. If he traced the chain of events, it always led to the same origin: a quiet, hungry boy deciding to share his bread with a stray dog. That choice lit a fuse of compassion that never stopped burning. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful eve, Billy was invited to speak at a large charity gala. The stage lights blinded him momentarily. Hundreds of attendees in formal attire sat listening. He recounted the story, voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "It all started with a piece of stale bread," he began. He described the puppy's trembling frame, how it symbolized his own vulnerability. The audience gasped, teary-eyed at each twist: soup kitchens, winter shelters, heartbreak, and triumph. Applause thundered when he finished. The event raised record donations for homeless youth and stray animal programs. Billy stepped off the stage, tears in his eyes, feeling Buddy's spirit at his side. In a private corner, he exhaled deeply, remembering how once he'd struggled for every crumb, for any sliver of warmth. Now people thanked him for existing, for shining a light on urgent issues. He smiled humbly, wishing Buddy could have been there in the flesh to wag a tail at this victory. But he felt the pup's presence in his heart. He whispered, "Thank you, Buddy. We did it." The city might still be cold and indifferent to many, but hope had found a champion who understood their plight firsthand. Walking home, he breathed in the crisp December air, the scents of cinnamon and pine swirling around him. Christmas lights draped the tall skyscrapers, winking against the velvet night. He admired them differently now, not as mocking illusions, but as glimmers of unity if we care enough to see. When he approached the old shelter that once took him in, he noticed a group huddled outside, hungry faces reminiscent of his younger self. Without hesitation, he approached them, offering spare gift cards for hot meals, giving a comforting word. One child clung to a scrawny kitten. Billy's heart clenched. He told them about the resources available, scrawling an address. "Don't lose hope," he whispered. "You matter." There are people who'll help. That night before bed, he paused in the living room of his modest apartment. Photos on the wall chronicled his journey. The day he arrived at the Turner house, high school graduation, a battered collar on a small stand. Buddy's collar. He gently touched it, recalling the dog's unconditional loyalty. The apartment was silent, no warm muzzle greeting him. Yet the echo of Buddy's companionship lingered in every corner. Billy realized that love, once ignited, never fully fades. It becomes part of you, fueling each compassionate act you perform in return. He dreamed of a future where homeless kids wouldn't have to endure the perils he faced. Maybe more shelters would allow pets. Maybe more volunteers would extend a hand or sandwich to a child in need. Maybe more families like the Turners would open their doors. He resolved to keep pushing for those possibilities, one speech, one donation, one rescue at a time. Drifting into sleep, he murmured a final goodnight to Buddy, imagining the pup bounding around in a place free from all suffering. Time passed, and Billy's memoir earned modest acclaim, taught in a few social studies classes about empathy and resilience. Teachers used it to show students how small choices can redefine a life. Students often wrote him letters saying, "Your story changed how I see homeless people," or "I adopted a stray dog because of you." Each letter lit a spark in Billy's heart, reminding him how unstoppable compassion could be once it started rolling. He responded personally to as many as he could, praising them for taking positive actions. One frosty night, he found himself at a local bookstore hosting a signing for an updated version of his memoir, now titled The Bread That Saved Us. People lined up, some holding dogs on leashes. A teenage girl approached, eyes brimming. She explained how she was homeless last Christmas, survived through a church basement, and read Billy's story while cradling her own stray kitten. She said it convinced her to seek help instead of running away. Billy's throat tightened, tears surfacing. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, hugging her. The cycle of kindness was still spinning, unstoppable. As the city's holiday season thrived once again, Billy walked among the cheerful crowds. He passed the same department store that displayed elaborate Christmas scenes, toy trains chugging, animatronic reindeer bobbing. He felt a twinge of nostalgia for the boy who once gazed at it, starving. Now he strolled with purpose, carrying a bag of dog treats in memory of Buddy. He placed them at a local animal shelter, ensuring some stray puppy would get a taste of comfort. "Merry Christmas," he muttered under his breath, snowflakes kissing his cheeks like gentle blessings. That Christmas Eve, he returned to the old corner where it all began. The wind whispered along the alley, not as bitter as before, but still cold enough to remind him of that night's peril. He laid down a small piece of bread wrapped in a red ribbon, a symbolic tribute. Beneath flickering holiday lights, Billy closed his eyes, recalling how the puppy's eyes shone like tiny mirrors of his own despair. In offering that bread, he had unknowingly fed his own hope. Now the memory stood as proof that miracles can blossom from the darkest depths of winter. A gentle voice startled him. "Are you okay?" A passerby had stopped, noticing him standing alone with bread on the pavement. Billy turned, smiling wistfully. "I'm fine, thank you. Just remembering." The passerby nodded, confusion flickering across their face. Billy took a final glance at that worn spot, then stepped away, letting the wind carry away the ribbons. Tomorrow he'd resume his mission, advocating for those in need, championing empathy, sharing how one selfless moment on a freezing night shifted his entire life course. He walked off, boots crunching in fresh snow, the city lights shimmering overhead like watchful stars. And so the story continues, unending in its ripple effects. Billy's journey from a lonely boy offering his final crumb of bread to a puppy on a desolate Christmas Eve became an emblem of how compassion can triumph over despair. In every speech he gave, every shelter he visited, he carried the puppy's spirit. People who heard the tale discovered the possibility of transformation in their smallest actions. Billy himself lived each day guided by the lesson Buddy taught him. Kindness, however insignificant it may seem, can spark hope in ways we never imagined. For on that cold night, two souls in need saved one another, and the incredible outcome still resonates today.